again everybody, today I'm back and today I'm going to be doing a video I've not done in months. It's a book haul. So earlier on today I was looking through and thinking about whether I should do a book haul or not, and that I actually haven't bought many books in the past few months, and so I wasn't sure how much they'd be. But when I looked back on my channel, the last book haul I did was in June, the very start of June, and given that now it is the very start of October, that is 4 months. 4 months without doing a book haul is just mind-boggling to me. But that does make me feel slightly better because as I started going through my shelves, I realised I've got quite a lot of books in the past 4 months or so. It's the biggest haul I've done in a long time, and it should be. It is 4 months, but it does make me feel better knowing that there is a reason I have got so many books to show today. So, in the interest of full disclosure, I should say that a good chunk of the books here are either advanced reading copies I've got from publishers or are from the publisher that I myself work for. So it's not going to affect anything I say about on this channel. I'm still going to give my full honest opinions about everything, but it's just best to disclose to you guys so you guys know that I actually have got a good number of these books for free for reading and review purposes, and I haven't spent as much money as it might look like when I wave these around, but also just so you know, it is entirely still my thoughts on these books. With that in mind then, the first book, which is unsurprisingly non-fiction, is one that I received from the publisher I work for, and that's Suspicious Minds. So this is a book I'd eyed up in hardback for quite a long time and ummed about, and saw it in paperback and decided, yes, I need to read this. It's a really interesting look at conspiracy theories, but not in the usual way. It's not assessing the viability of conspiracy theories or whether we should believe them. It's about why people find conspiracy theories so interesting, why do so many people believe them, what is it about our brains and the way they work that makes conspiracy theories of particular interest. And it's fascinating. I read a lot of kind of smart, popular psychology stuff, and I think conspiracy theories are fascinating, and this is a really interesting book that combines all that into one for me. While we're on the kind of psychological vein then, the next is Shrinks by Jeffrey A. Lieberman. So this is very much in the vein of books like Do No Harm and Being Mortal, you know, those ones that I never shut up about. I'm very aware I talk about them a lot, don't worry. But it's that kind of anecdotal, lots of little stories from this shrink and other shrinks about the kind of their patients and the psychological things they've gone through and helped patients through. And it offers a slightly different twist on things like Do No Harm, which is much more medical, whereas this is a lot more psychology, so I'm intrigued to see how that fits in, but I think I'll really enjoy it as well. Next up is another advanced reading copy then, and that's Bring Back the King. Now this is about a science called de-extinction, which is basically about bringing back from the dead extinct species, and it's got a really interesting chapter in this where it talks about things about like the possibility of bringing back Elvis and reviving humans, and those kinds of really interesting it almost feels like futuristic, almost science fiction topics, but it is surprisingly seeming to be quite an on the horizon science, and it's really interesting, something I'd never really thought about before, but really interesting to see how that could fit into modern society. Now the next one is something of a first on my channel, and it's a cookbook. So I do usually get more cookbooks, I just don't show them on this channel, but this one is so beautiful I feel like I really need to show it off. It's called The Land of Fish and Rice by Fuchsia Dunlop, and it's all kind of Shanghai and the surrounding regions Chinese cookery, and it is genuinely gorgeous, even as you can tell from the cover, but even inside you can see the recipes. It's just so beautifully illustrated and written, and it just has got so many amazing and quite easy recipes in that I can't wait to get a crack at. I've not tried any of them yet, but I can't wait to give them a go. So now we're on to fiction, which actually, surprisingly for me, takes up the bulk of my haul at this point. So the first three are ones I've talked about before, and something which I believe many of you might have thinking I've forgotten about, but I am still on it, don't you worry. And that's the 3 books picked for my 500 subscriber special. Yes, I'm aware that was a long time ago, but I'm still doing it, don't you worry. So that's Girl Meets Boy by Ali Smith, A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki, and The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I've read 2 of the 3 of these so far, got some really interesting thoughts about them, but I'll do a whole separate video about what I thought. But also, they're just really interesting books that I've been wanting to read for ages, and they're just such an interesting selection to read together. I read Girl Meets Boy and Tale for the Time Being successively, and it was just a really interesting way of really getting into the head of the person who'd selected these books, but also they're quite comparable in a lot of ways, and it was really good fun to be able to explore that. But like I say, I'll put a whole other video up in the next few weeks talking about these and what I've picked as the recommendations for the winner. Next up is a book of short stories called The 10th of December by George Saunders. So George Saunders is one of the authors published by the publisher I work for, and he's got a novel coming out next year which is getting such big hype. but I've never actually read any of his short stories. 10th of December won the Folio Prize a couple of years ago now, and it is literally one of those books that everyone who's read it just absolutely raves about it. I honestly, I don't know one person who's read these and not enjoyed them, and I can't wait to give them a read. I've not read any short stories in actually quite a long time, but I do actually really, really enjoy short stories. It's something I've discovered in the past year or so, but I'm really excited to get stuck into these and see what all the hype's about. Next up's another advanced reading copy of a book which is so up my street, I can't even tell you. It's The Terranauts by T.C. Boyle. So T.C. Boyle's a really prolific American author. Not quite as well known in the UK, but he's a very prolific author in America, and he writes completely varied things, and this is quite topical, actually. Basically, 25 or so years ago, there was an experiment called Biosphere 2, which is essentially when they set up a hermetically sealed biosphere with a ton of plant species and animal species and 8 people, 4 boys, 4 girls, inside, and sealed it for 2 years, and the people had to try and survive in this sealed atmosphere. It's kind of setting the stage for things about colonising Mars and surviving in hostile environments such as that. And T.C. Boyle has done a fictionalised account of one of the experiments. It's really interesting, goes into a lot of the kind of psychological elements of that kind of segregation, but also deals with lots of interesting things about science and ecology and the future of humanity and what it means to be human and work within a team of other people and still remain human. Just a really interesting mixture of quite psychological, almost Margaret Atwood-esque philosophical questions and things explored through this, and it's just a really interesting book. It is big. It's about 500 something pages. It took me a long time to read, but it's a really interesting one which covers a really unusual theme, and especially with the anniversary coming up, and I think it is just a really interesting book. Now we're sticking with fiction, but the next one is one that is actually a really big surprise for me because it is one that is Booker Prize shortlisted. Now, normally something being shortlisted for a prize or winning a prize doesn't really interest me. I feel like what hooks me about books is the blurb and the concept rather than the accolades and the praise it's got from elsewhere. I'm very subjective in how I read, and I don't let necessarily other people's opinions influence that. But in this case, I am reading one of the Booker Prize shortlists, but just because I think it sounds so fascinating. Here's Bloody Project. So it's set in mid-19th century Scotland. It's about a guy who's accused of committing a triple murder, and it's basically the court case of what happens to him. It's his testimony, then the testimony of people in the town that he lives in, and just all these mixed opinions about what it was that happened, whether it was him. And again, it's quite psychological. It deals quite a lot with human relationships, and it's just a really unusual one. Everyone was quite surprised it's got nominated for the prize because it is technically probably a crime novel. It's a bit more genre than the Booker Prize normally goes, but it is a really interesting one, and I think it's a really unusual setting, and it has been getting a lot of really interesting reviews and coverage, and I can't wait to give that a read. It's something quite different for me, while still staying within my kind of safe zone, but I can't wait to give that a read and see what all the hype's about. Now, while we're on the crime section, the next up is a Robert Harris book called Imperium. So anyone that's watched any of my videos will probably know that I'm a bit of a history geek. I did a history degree and specialise in ancient history, and I do like fiction set in ancient historical periods, and this is one of those. So this is set in ancient Rome, and it's a kind of crime, vaguely espionage-y, vaguely literary thriller. And I've heard so much about Robert Harris's work and the way he kind of encapsulates the period he's in, but makes a really interesting story, and it's not too dense. And that's exactly what I'm after in this kind of book. It's the first in a trilogy. The third has just finally come out after years of people waiting. So now I feel like it's a good time to pick it up without having to wait myself. And I think it's just a really interesting book and an interesting series that I think I'll really enjoy. So next up, we're taking a bit of a diversion into sci-fi territory. And the first book is a really interesting one called The Three-Body Problem. So this was the winner of the 2015 Hugo Award. It got a ton of really good publicity, and it's a really interesting concept, which is why I picked it up. As you can tell probably a little bit by the cover, it's got that kind of almost Dan Brown-esque thriller element to it, in that it is like a big mystery as opposed to kind of a space opera or anything of that nature. But the really interesting thing, as you can potentially tell by the author's name, is that this is a sci-fi. It's not particularly far future, it's quite current, but with very interesting influences in that it is Chinese set as opposed to Western influenced. Now, a lot of sci-fi is very obviously influenced by American, European ideals and settings, and this really, really turns it on its head. And it's set through pretty much modern China, but obviously with a vaguely sci-fi twist. And it's just a really unusual thing. I find Chinese and Asian culture really interesting anyway. Quite a few of the books I've read recently have had that kind of influence, and I think to get that in a sci-fi book is really rare, and I can't wait to give it a read. Now, in a very similar vein, we've also got Lament for the Fallen, which is a very similar kind of near-future sci-fi, but just of a really interesting setting again. Now, this, instead of being Asian set, is African set, and again, that's a culture I haven't really explored through any fiction, really. Little bits here and there, but it's not something that I've really delved into. But I think getting such a unique culture in such a unique genre and style of book is really interesting. That's what pulled me straight in. Other than that, it's also the cover, which is absolutely gorgeous. It's definitely got that African influence, but it definitely screams sci-fi at the same time, and it really seems to capture the content really well, while also being incredibly beautiful. As soon as I saw this on social media, I knew I needed to get one. Thank you so much to the publisher for sending me one through. So there we have it. That's my book haul for the past 4 months, which still I find a bit ridiculous. There's a ton of really amazing books there, stuff I really can't wait to get stuck into, and now I really am going to try and limit myself in buying more books. I've found that I'm reading a lot less now I'm in London. I don't know why, whether there's so much going on or with different commute types and things, but it's taken me a little bit longer to read books, and so I really don't need to buy as many as I have been, and with so many amazing, interesting things here, I just want to get stuck into these before I buy anything else. With that said, if you've got any suggestions for things based on these that you think I should read in the future to add to my list, or if you've read any of these and got any interesting thoughts, do let me know in the comments down below. Always intrigued to know what you guys think. Also, a like and subscribe is always super appreciated. It really means the world to me. We're so close to 700 subscribers, which is mind-boggling because I feel like 500 subscribers was literally about 3 weeks ago. So the fact that we're nearly at 700 now is just so amazing to me, and I really appreciate all the support from you guys. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to leave my Twitter and my Goodreads in the description down below, so do feel free to get in touch, tweet me, follow me on Goodreads, suggest me things, etc. And other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon with my next video.